My name is Eleanor Whitman. I am 67 years old. And tonight I held a lockbox in my trembling hands that my son buried under the oak tree behind my lake house. I watched him and his wife from my bedroom window, their shovels slicing into the dirt as if they were planting flowers. They believed I was asleep. Too fragile to notice. Too broken to ask questions. They were wrong. The box was still cold when I dug it up an hour later, its metal edges smeared with damp soil. Inside were papers that should never have been hidden from me, Harold's real will. Dated months after the one my son had forced into probate. Bank statements showing money drained from accounts I never touched. And then the letter. My grandson Cole's careful handwriting spilled across the page. A confession he'd written to his grandfather before Harold died. In it, Cole admitted he overheard his parents planning to make sure the old woman doesn't complicate things. He begged Harold to protect me. Harold is gone. Cole is only 16. And I am holding proof that my own child, Mark Whitman, is planning my disappearance. Tonight, I stopped being the grieving widow. Tonight, I became their enemy. The morning after I uncovered the lockbox, Mark arrived at my house with his wife, Lila. Carrying that polished concern they wore like a second skin. Over coffee, they circled back to the same topic they had been pressing for months. The houses, both the family home and the lake property, were too much for a woman my age. Mark leaned forward with that practiced mixture of patience and urgency, insisting the maintenance was a burden I shouldn't carry. Lila followed with soft-voiced suggestions about a senior community where I could have companionship and safety. Their pitch sharpened when they mentioned Cole. Good colleges were expensive. They reminded me, if I sold both properties and invested wisely under Mark's guidance, not only would I be comfortable, but Cole's future would be secure. I watched my grandson's name become their bargaining chip, their weapon to paint me as selfish if I resisted. What they didn't know was that I once managed financial controls for a hospital. Numbers and documents were my language. When I glanced at the will Mark had paraded months earlier, I remembered the signatures, the dates, the way the ink looked too perfect. Something had been wrong then, and I had ignored it. By the following afternoon, my decision was clear. I made copies of every page from the lockbox, sealed them in a manila envelope, and placed it inside a safety deposit box at the local bank. The originals I carried in my purse, close enough to feel the weight of truth pressing against my side. I knew then that this battle could not be won with anger alone. It had to be fought with evidence. That evening, I met with Avery Brooks, the estate attorney I trusted more than anyone outside my family. I laid out the documents on his desk, my hand steady for the first time since Harold's death. Avery studied each page, then looked up at me with calm certainty. "You don't confront them yet," he said. "You let them talk. We make them expose themselves." He handed me a small recording device, barely larger than a key fob. The plan was simple. I would invite Mark and Lila to dinner, play the grieving widow who needed guidance, and let their ambition loosen their tongues. My role was not to accuse, not to argue, but to listen. Every word would be captured, every careless slip stored as proof. I had once promised Harold I would check the papers myself. This time, I was finally keeping that promise. The following night, I set the table with Harold's favorite dishes, the kind Mark always praised as if nostalgia were another lever he could pull. The small recorder rested beneath the lace runner, its light blinking once before I covered it with a bowl of rolls. When the doorbell rang, I forced a smile and opened my home as though nothing between us had changed. Over dinner, Mark began his well-rehearsed script. The house was too much for me. The taxes unreasonable. The upkeep dangerous. He spoke with a son's concern but an investor's urgency. Lila leaned in with her practiced sympathy. describing how she had toured a retirement community with lovely activities and neighbors my own age. Her words dripped with sweetness. Yet every phrase tightened the noose. Then Mark let the mask slip. "Old houses create old accidents," he said, slicing into Harold's roast as if the meal itself were a metaphor. My heart hammered. But I kept my expression mild. I asked only one question. My voice small, almost hesitant. If he managed the accounts, how much freedom would I have to withdraw? Not much, he admitted. Almost casually, there would be limits. For your protection. The recorder caught every syllable. Their smiles never faltered. But I could feel the cold edge behind them. That night, they believed they had cornered me. In truth, they had just given me the weapon I needed. The next morning, I sat across from Avery Brooks in his downtown office, spreading out the bank statements I had pulled from the lockbox. Together, we traced the path of Harold's accounts like following a trail of crumbs through a forest. What emerged was a pattern so deliberate it turned my stomach. Within 3 weeks of Harold's funeral, nearly $400,000 had been siphoned out of accounts I thought were intact. The money was funneled into 3 new accounts, each one opened under Mark's authority, each disguised as a consolidation for my convenience. Avery's face remained calm, but his pen tapped against the page with quiet intensity. He explained the charges clearly: elder financial abuse, forgery, and breach of fiduciary duty. This wasn't sloppy bookkeeping or a simple mistake. It was theft, carried out by my own son. We filed immediately for a temporary protective order, barring Mark and Lila from making further withdrawals or approaching me with new paperwork. Avery assured me that both civil and criminal actions could move in tandem, clawing back whatever remained while ensuring the authorities had reason to act. For months I had felt powerless, cornered in my own home. Now, with every number traced and every signature questioned, I felt the balance begin to shift. 2 weeks later, the knock came early in the morning. When Mark opened his front door, he was met not by neighbors but by 2 county investigators and a court officer carrying a search order. Lila stood behind him in a silk robe, her practiced smile faltering when she saw the papers. They had come for the computers, the files, and anything related to my accounts. I wasn't there, but Avery called me within the hour. The search turned up more than we expected. On Mark's laptop, investigators found draft documents describing me as mentally compromised, along with a checklist outlining how to manage assets after an accidental fall. In Lila's email folders were exchanges with real estate agents about quick sales of both the family home and the lake property, timed within months of Harold's death. What struck me most were the handwritten notes, scrawled in Mark's own script, rehearsing lines he would deliver to convince me of my fragility. The mask of a devoted son was beginning to crack under the weight of his own words. Avery's voice was steady but firm. "This is enough to keep them in the system," he said. "And disparate people? Eleanor, make disparity mistakes." The hunt for truth was no longer quiet. It was official. The deeper investigators dug, the more layers of deception surfaced. Among Harold's old files, Avery discovered a sealed envelope Harold had hidden months before his death. Inside were medical records and handwritten notes, evidence that made my knees weaken. Harold had quietly ordered a paternity test after noticing inconsistencies in Cole's blood type during a hospital visit. The results were conclusive. Mark was not Cole's biological father. The truth unraveled quickly. For 16 years, Lila had concealed that Cole was the child of Adam Pierce, her college boyfriend, a physician who had unknowingly sent quiet financial support under the belief his son lived in modest circumstances. Lila had pocketed those checks while presenting Mark as Cole's father and painting our family as financially stretched. When Avery told me, I felt both rage and sorrow. Harold had known but kept the secret, hoping to shield Cole from a revelation that could fracture him. But now the truth sat like a lit fuse, threatening to ignite everything. The discovery raised questions I wasn't ready to answer. Should Cole be told? Should the courts know? Would revealing Adam Pierce change anything? Or would it simply give Mark one more excuse to claim betrayal? The financial theft was criminal. The murder plot was unforgivable. But this was personal. And it had the power to rip apart the last thread of family Cole thought he had left. Once the paternity truth surfaced, Avery moved swiftly to protect Cole. He petitioned the court for a temporary guardianship order, arguing that the boy was both a vulnerable witness and the subject of potential intimidation. The judge agreed, granting me temporary custody and restricting Mark and Lila from direct contact. For the first time in weeks, Cole slept in my house without fear of being pulled into his parents' storm. Adam Pierce stepped forward quietly, offering a financial plan that would shield Cole from further exploitation. He set up a scholarship trust in Cole's name, contributions drawn from his own practice, structured with full transparency. It was the opposite of the secrecy Lila had wrapped him in for years. Lila's composure began to fracture under the weight of the order. She whispered about working something out. But Mark pushed back hard, demanding they fight. Their unity cracked in real time, each protecting their own survival. I watched Cole sit at my kitchen table, a 16-year-old boy forced into the role of witness and heir to truths he never asked for. The legal papers were only the beginning, but they gave me the most important thing of all time to keep him safe. The courtroom was hushed when the hearing began. Mark sat rigid in his suit, jaw clenched, while Lila kept her eyes fixed on the polished table as if it might shield her. Their attorney painted me as a grieving widow too suspicious for her own good, suggesting age and loneliness had clouded my judgment. It was a carefully chosen insult, meant to make me look frail and unsteady. Then Avery stood. He played the recording from our dinner, the words echoing through the chamber. Mark's voice carried clear and cold. Old houses create old accidents. Lila's reply followed, gentle yet chilling, about safety and moving me before something happened. The silence that fell afterward was heavier than any gavel. Cole rose slowly from the witness bench. His voice cracked but never faltered. "I love my parents," he said. "But I love my grandmother more than I love keeping family secrets." His words broke the last thread of denial holding the room together. Avery presented the rest methodically. Harold's true will, the fraudulent transfers of nearly $400,000, the forged paperwork, and finally, the confirmation of Adam Pierce's financial support for Cole. It was not speculation. It was a chain of evidence too strong to ignore. The judge denied Mark's request for release, ordering him held until trial. Lila's name joined his in the charges, her shoulders curling inward under the weight of betrayal laid bare. For the first time in months, I felt justice leaning in my direction. When the court-appointed auditors finished their review, the figures were stark. Out of nearly $400,000 siphoned from Harold's accounts, less than $30,000 remained across the shell accounts Mark had opened. The rest had vanished into failed property flips, luxury cars already repossessed, and payments to cover mounting debts. Every dollar carried a trail of arrogance and desperation. And now that trail led straight to a courtroom docket. For Mark, the losses were more than financial. His license as a broker was suspended, his reputation shredded in a profession where trust was currency. Lila fared no better. Brands cut tees overnight. Sponsorships collapsed. And her lifestyle blog became a barren page no advertiser would touch. Their public image, once polished and enviable, had crumbled into a cautionary tale whispered in the same neighborhoods they once bragged about. I sat with Avery as he closed the file. "This is the cost," he said quietly. "They thought they could spend your future like it was their inheritance. Now they'll pay with their own." And for the first time, I believed him. A week after the hearing, Avery handed me a plain envelope with my name written in Harold's familiar hand. He explained it had been entrusted to him months earlier, with instructions to deliver it only if Harold passed and certain disputes arose. My fingers shook as I unfolded the letter, the scent of Harold's study clinging faintly to the paper. Inside, Harold's voice seemed to reach across the silence. He wrote of his fears, of the way he had watched Mark's ambition twist into entitlement, and of his hope that I would never face him as an enemy. He reminded me of our promise to protect each other, even beyond the years we were given. Tucked behind the letter was a deed, a gift Harold had purchased in secret, a small cottage in Maine, overlooking a quiet lake, bought in my name alone. If you are reading this, he wrote, it means you survived their schemes. Live here not as someone who endured, but as someone who overcame. That evening, Cole and I drove north to see it. Standing on the porch, with wildflowers growing along the steps, I felt Harold's presence settle around us like a steady hand. For the first time, I allowed myself to breathe freely. The final rulings left no one untouched. Mark Whitman was convicted on multiple counts of elder financial abuse, forgery, and conspiracy to cause harm. His sentence was not measured only in years but in the loss of every privilege he once flaunted. The man who had called himself a real estate visionary now stood stripped of license, reputation, and freedom. His name spoken only in court transcripts and whispered warnings. Lila Whitman faced her own reckoning. She pled guilty to concealing funds and aiding fraudulent transfers. Though her term was lighter, she forfeited the sponsorships and endorsements that had once financed her carefully staged image. No brand would touch her again, and her lifestyle blog became a hollow remnant of what she had tried to sell as truth. The court barred her from controlling Cole's finances, leaving her adrift, reputation stained beyond repair. Cole remained with me under the guardianship order. That summer, he began a preparatory program funded transparently through Adam Pierce's scholarship trust. His first steps toward shaping a life on his own terms. He carried scars. Yes, but also the clarity of a young man who had chosen truth over silence. As for me, I sold the large family home by choice, not coercion, and kept Harold's lake property alongside the cottage in Maine. With Avery's help, I reclaimed what could be salvaged and closed the rest. Justice did not restore what was lost, but it ensured that betrayal carried its price, and no one walked away untouched. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.